Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another OSR Tabletop with DM Bluddworth. And I have the distinct pleasure to welcome my guest, Stephen Chenault of Troll Lord Games. And Stephen, real great pleasure to meet you, and really excited to have you on the channel. So I'll just open it up to you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your company and your the game that your company that you could really say that this was the one that put us out there and made Troll Lord Games the game company that it is.
Well, thanks for having me. I sure appreciate coming on. It's always a lot of fun to do these shows. So my name is Stephen Chenault. I'm the CEO of Troll Lord Games. I've been running the show here since, I guess, 03 or so. I took over from Mac Golden. Mac Golden, a very, very close friend of mine. Myself and my brother Davis started Troll Lord Games back in 1999 at Vino's Pizzeria in downtown Little Rock over some beers and pepperoni pizza. And Mac ran the company for the first 3 years, but his day job kind of took that and him in other directions, though he still has a lot to do with what we do. In fact, he was co-creator of Castles and Crusades, which we'll get into here shortly. But I took over when he stepped down and left the company. I took over in 2003, and I've been running it ever since. We have, I think, one of our first early break was we published D20 under the OGL. We released three small adventures and a setting book, and they sold extraordinarily well as D20 was exploding all over the place. That kind of put Troll Lord Games on the map. And even as we were kind of adjusting to this sudden, small success and figuring out what we're going to do, because we really didn't have any kind of business plan, laid out after that, Mac suggested we reach out to Gary Gygax, whom he had talked to at the Gen Con where we debuted in the year 2000. So I did. I reached out to Gary Gygax, and within a few months, we were signing contracts and then publishing Gary Gygax. So that really propelled us forward in the beginning. We didn't really have much kind of in the queue of what we were going to do, some adventures, some ideas that we had, expanding the setting and whatnot. Gary's stuff started coming at us pretty fast, and we began rolling that out. And then we continued publishing D20 for about, I want to say, 4 or 5 years, and being very, very new to the business world and how all of this stuff works. I did not see it coming, but I was warned by a good friend of mine, John Nephew over at Atlas Games, that you better do something because D20 is fixing to implode, that the market's fixing to collapse, and you better hope Gary's name can carry you through it. So we began looking at different options of what we wanted to do. Talking to Gary, Davis and Mac had always wanted to make their own role-playing game. I'm not much of a game designer myself. I'm more of a writer. I do a whole lot of background stuff, the setting books, all that's my material. But mechanics, it's Davis and Mac's thing. So they got in, they sat down, worked a little bit with Gary about what Gary needed for Castle Zagic, which was on the link. And as they were putting that together, the D20 market collapsed. I mean, it just, we probably dropped 80 to 85% sales. It was catastrophic. And the only thing that kept going for the next 18 months, 2 years, as we put Castles and Crusades together, was Gary's all of the products that we had been publishing for Gary, and he continued to send to us. That kept us, floating through that really, really dark time. And in 2000, so that's like 2003, 4, I get all these years mixed up. But in 2004 at Gen Con, we had the very skeleton of Castles and Crusades put together, and we released this limited edition white box set. And then the player's handbook came out in December of that year with an official release in January of 2005, I think. And that's where the market was collapsing. And of course, Castles, no one knew who or what it was. So it was selling okay. It sold better than distributor stock. But in the beginning, it was slow. And we didn't have a monster book. We didn't have any adventures. We didn't have anything except the player's handbook. And I think we had one adventure, A1. And then so after that, we began focusing on Castles and Crusades and Gary. Of course, then Gary passes away in 2008. That was another catastrophic blow to the company, and we almost didn't survive. But about that time, CNC starting to get its legs. It's starting to grow now. We've got the monster book out. We're working on the the CKG, though it won't be out until 010. We've got a couple dozen adventures, just this, that, and the other. And along with that, we had taken some of our proceeds and invested in our own print shop. So we were able to cut expenses immensely by, manufacturing stuff in-house, something that we still do to this day. So then Castles and Crusades starts picking up. We start looking at other things, a little bit of fiction, a little bit here and there, that we hack our way through the aughts. And then the game starts really beginning to pick up by 11 or 12, and it's done nothing but grow since then. We're on our 9th printing. Will be out in December or January. I'm not sure. The whole print industry is upside down because of paper shortages and an excess in clients, because so many people have quit printing in China, Taiwan, and India and Vietnam, and they've moved it back stateside because of the gluts in the sea lanes and all the other problems that that everybody seems to be enjoying simultaneously. And so it has definitely log jammed the printer. So in theory, the 9th printing will be out for Christmas, but I'm not going to swear to that.
Yeah. Well,
that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I'm waiting for my 8th. It's the 8th printings, because I just put them out. I absolutely love the homage that you played with the covers. I mean, especially the new Monsters and Treasures book. That is just such an incredible thing. I wish I could put up pictures, on this as well, just to show those off. But I actually ordered them like last week, and I was like, all right, 2 to 4 days, it'll be here. I literally leave for vacation tonight. So I was like, I hope I get them. And then all of a sudden I see they shipped on Tuesday. I was like, it could still get here. It could still get here,
Well, sadly, we're going to have to put this up on the website. So the post office, so media mail is how we order our books, right? Everybody go to where I do it as well. The post office says on their site, and you'll get the notification, 3 to 5 days, you said this thing. That's not even close to the truth.
Yeah.
It is about 7 to 15 days now.
That'll be fine.
Yeah, it's crazy how it's all everything just seems to slow down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, at least I have my PDF, so I will be reading the codex on my vacation. That's my reading source. And I'm looking through it, and I was like, holy crap, this is really dense. And it's literally it's a literary piece of work. I mean, I'm reading through it, and I guess that's your that's your forte. That's yours. And I'm reading it, and I was like, wow, it's like I'm not going to feel like super comfortable just jumping into this world setting. I want to learn about the world setting before I actually start my campaign, which will be my next campaign anyway, will be a Castles and Crusades, and jumping in using that game world, because I had a lot of people saying, well, what world setting are you going to use? Is it going to be Greyhawk? Is it going to be Forgotten? I was like, no, I use the setting that's made for the game, when I'm running the game. It's like I think they really go hand in hand, generally speaking. I feel the same way with like AD&D first edition. You play with Greyhawk, I mean, there's nothing else. I mean, why would I bring that to Forgotten Realms? I wouldn't, so as you could tell, and we were talking about this a little bit ahead of time, but I mean, I'm an old school gamer. All right. And I started in 77, probably 10, 11 years old. And, started with, I don't even know which one. It might have been Holmes. It was probably Holmes edition. Because I don't remember my friend having the white box, and then we immediately shifted, within like 18 months or so. As soon as first edition came out, we shifted to first edition. And we played that for, we played D&D as our fantasy RPG exclusively until about 87 or 88. Then I had a huge break, and I've told this story many times. I had a huge break from from tabletop role playing. When I shifted to consoles, I kind of followed everybody with Sega and PlayStation later on, and all of them, and then we moved on into computer gaming, and I was there with Daggerfall, and the initial offerings of Elder Scrolls and stuff, then into massively multiplayer, games. I never did EverQuest, but I did the ones that came in the early 2000s, and then around 2015, I came back to tabletop. I was older and kind of burnt out on MMOs, and I was like, I want to get back to tabletop games, and I just found myself going right back to the old ones that I played. So I went back to D&D, Beck Me, and I went back to AD&D First Edition. And then the one thing that I kept on running into amongst like people in the community that I listen to or just follow, watch their videos and stuff, was that there's like they were saying that there's pushback, or at least not a desire of newer players to play those old books that are out of print and everything. They're harder to get, or they're expensive to buy on eBay, and I was like, well, I want to find a game that is a modern game system, but still has that essence of the old school, and particularly, that old AD&D First Edition. And then I came across Castles and Crusades, and I, started glancing through it. I was like, hey, that's pretty cool. It sat on my shelf for like a year, and then about a month ago or so, I said, let me start spending some time doing this, because I eventually get around to reviewing whatever I have on the shelf behind me. And I started going through it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is it really is a continuation of what AD&D First Edition was. And I think that, even better than what AD&D Second Edition was. I see a straighter line between what Castles and Crusades does and what AD&D Second Edition did, a straighter line from AD&D First Edition. Then I started hearing people say, well, Gary actually said that this was the natural successor of AD&D in his mind, and so that's one of the things that, did you have that sense when you were making Castles and Crusades that this was going to be a continuation of the essence of Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah. So let me real quick thank Malaki for the very kind comment about Castles and Crusades. Very much appreciated. And Stephen Clough, I hope you have a grand time diving into it. There's a couple of philosophies that went into Castles and Crusades. There's a whole bunch of them, but I can kind of focus. And if Mac were here, Davis here, I'm sure they'd give me a slightly different take on when the game was being created. I remember we did interviews, Davis, Mac, and I, for the Crusader podcast a couple years back, where each of us told our version of how Trollord games came to be. And they were all sort of similar, but they were all kind of different. It was really hilarious to listen to, because we remembered it differently. But I remember Mac and Davis, when we first began talking about it, when after John Nephew had told me this thing's going to collapse, you're going to have to do something. Now, that's directly in conjunction with Gary and I working on lots and lots of stuff. And he was, in about that time frame, we'd been pushing him to do Castle Zagging for quite a while, and he just didn't want to do it. He wasn't interested in doing it. And then, for those who don't know, that's his gigantic mega dungeon castle, which was Castle Greyhawk way back in the Woebegone days, and he had changed it to Castle Zagging. He just didn't want to do it. He was tired of doing adventures and all of that stuff. But he was coming around to it. And I remember he asked, we were his primary publisher. He worked with a couple other companies, but he asked, can I shop this around, see if we can't find a larger publisher than Troller Games? I was like, yeah, absolutely, go. Well, he couldn't find anyone that he was comfortable working with. So he came back to Trollord and said, hey, let's just do it. We're going to do it through Troller Games. Gary and I worked very well together. I protected his IP. We did a lot. It's just, we had a really good working relationship. So, and I told him this works. He asked me how best to go about doing this with the OGL. And I said, you have a couple of options. You can just OGL the thing and make your own really basic rules, put the orcs in there as orcs, whatever, because it's all open, and then just let people figure it out. Because it's not, if you're playing AD&D, it's going to be really easy, to convert that kind of text over. Or we've got this game that we're putting together. We haven't quite named it yet. I can't remember what the original name was. There was Sword and Wizardry. There's a couple of names that were floating around the office. That Mac and Davis are developing it, and it's going to have some serious AD&D resonation throughout the whole development process. And he liked that idea. And where that came from, I started gaming. I think I actually pulled him out a couple weeks ago. I started gaming in 75 or 76. Yeah, I actually found. So these are the original books that we gamed with. Just from long ago. So I had been gaming forever, but I didn't know how to play. Davis, my brother, ran the game. He had the books. He would make me characters, give me the characters, and give me dice. I didn't know what was going on. He'd say, roll initiative, whatever. So that went on a while. And I remember when he got the monster manual, I was with him. We bought that at Sears. He got that for like $10 or something. And that he fused that into these little brown books. And then when the player's handbook came out, he got that and he gave that to me. He said, you need to read this book. And I was like, I'm not reading this book. I'm not reading this rule book. And I still haven't to this day read it. But we shifted kind of sort of like you did. We just kind of merged into AD&D somehow, this kind of amorphous gathering of box sets and lost rule books. None of us cared in those days. They weren't collector's items, right? We just treated them like they were books and you used them.
Right.
I started playing AD&D by 80 or whatever time frame that game's kind of coalesced, and I never looked back. I absolutely loved AD&D. Played it. When third edition came out, when we were publishing third edition, I played it once, I think. I didn't play it again. We hired a guy to convert my modules to third edition because I'd write them for AD&D, send it to Casey, and Casey would convert them for us. But when Castles, so that whole, there's that going on. And at this point, I'm running the company. I'm the primary guy at conventions. I'm pitching it to retailers and distributors. I'm the face of all of this stuff. And when Mac and Davis were when I said, hey, we got to do our own game. We either got to close shop or do our own game. And I don't want to design it. So if you guys want to, you've been talking about it for years. So they were more than happy to take that up. And they began designing the game. But I remember it was either Mac or Davis asked me, probably Davis. He said, since you're going to be selling this game, what is it that we need to kind of focus on? What kind of game system do we need to focus on? Because Davis likes rules heavy stuff, huge roll master from back in the day. And Mac doesn't. Mac can do, he can play about anything. He doesn't care if it's rules light, rules heavy. He doesn't care. He's a quick study and he's just good. But I don't like any of that. I told them both. I said, it's got to be rules light. It's got to be like AT&T. It's got to have that same spirit where when I go in there, I can do almost anything I want, and I'm not breaking anything, or players aren't pulling a rule book out and saying, this is the way this goes or whatever. So that was kind of the philosophy that was in there. So when Davis or when Gary started talking about Castle Gygax, I said, look, we've got this game. So we agreed that, and this is why you get such a natural transition from AD&D to Castles Crusades. When we created rules for CNC, because Gary was going to release Castle Gygax as CNC supplement, he had to approve the rules. He had to have a look over them and say, okay, this is cool. And that's what we did. There was this huge playtesting community that we worked with on the message boards, and Davis and Matt handled all that. And we would see when we get something kind of finalized, one of the interesting things we would do, because I hate reading rules so much, we set up a procedure where they would write it and I would read it. And if I didn't understand it in the first pass, it got kicked back. So when Gary got that stuff, it was a very easy system, easy to understand, and crazy easy to play. And it resonated with the attribute checks. Of course, it appeared, I guess, first in Wilderness Survival Guide. Is that right? Dungeoneer Survival Guide, something like that.
Yeah, probably. Yes. Yeah, I would say that's when you started. Yeah, and that's where the siege engine comes from.
I can't. You'd have to ask Mac where the siege engine concept came from. Really, yeah. I remember those two debated the number spread on that for months. It went
Mm-hmm.
on and on. There was a 15, 20, I can't remember what it was. They settled on 12-18, and I can't remember why they did. I'm sure it has something to do with statistics and probabilities and all of that gobbledygook. But I didn't follow any of that conversation. I didn't know what was going on with that. But I think, if I remember correctly, the AD&D attribute check system, you had to roll below your attribute. So if you had like a 17 con, you could roll 117, you succeeded, and you moved on. So, which is a cool, very simple system. And so we didn't use that, but I think the attribute check concept was already there. And they developed it, and it turned out to be as easy as they promised it would be. It is about the easiest mechanic.
And it's actually probably my favorite mechanic in it, in Castles and Crusades, because it opens up all kinds of possibilities for things not written in the book. So if you want to know, if the player says, I want my character to do this, all the castle keeper, I have to keep that in mind, castle keeper, all the castle keeper has to think about is, well, what attribute is this mostly related to? And what's the difficulty challenge I'm going to assign to it? And that's it, know. And I mean, you wisely avoided THACO, which which,
too much thinking.
Which I actually never had a problem with it, And I think that's like a goof kind of, like, where it's, there's THACO, and that wasn't complicated math at all. I mean, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think THACO has just a bad rep because it sounds complicated. It's really not.
But your system is actually much easier, and Castles and Crusades is probably the first time that I've come across ascending armor class, which I'm like, okay, I finally get it, because I never liked it. I'm so rooted in descending armor class because I just was like hard baked into my brain. But now I'm saying, I was like, now I can see that, with at least this system, and it's probably that simple everywhere else. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Now I see it. I was like, oh, okay, it's just a modifier now, on the rolls, and it just, it just makes more sense to me.
Well,
the way it's there.
It blends very seamlessly with the Siege engine, with our attribute checks, because it just kind of rolls together. I got to say, it's kind of a side note to all of that. This is about 6, 7, 8 years ago. I can't remember. We were gaming, and we're sitting here in the office pre-game, and Mac showed up. So one of the stalwart principles of Castles and Crusades, and I say this, so long as I am at the helm, there will not be a second edition of it. If I get fired or lose or whatever, someone may else come along and do it, say that's on them. But so long as I'm at the helm, there won't be a second edition. So there can't be any real major changes to the game, at least in the player's handbook. Other stuff, that's fine. But in the player's handbook, it's got to stay. And it has, other than some very superficial changes that we've done. But I remember about 8 or 9 years ago. So one of the things that Davis and Mac tried to do when they were creating it is they wanted one with the whole one ring to rule them all concept that we all know. They wanted one rule to rule the game. That was the idea. So that the Siege engine would be attribute checks for swimming and cajoling people or whatever you're doing, and combat. But they could never quite marry the two up, with all of their playtesting. And at a certain point, I remember when in the development point, I kept pressuring them, like, guys, you got to decide, one way or the other, so we can get this thing in print. And the T20 market is dissolving around us, so we need something. So fast forward a few years after our release, about 8, 9 years ago, whatever it was, I can't remember. But Mac's sitting here in the office pre-game, and he goes, "Dude, I figured it out. I figured out how to do a combat-oriented Siege engine." And he's got all these notes, and he's going all over this stuff. And I'm like, what the hell? And it looked great. It looked very cool. It looked very fun. But I told him, I said, sadly, dude, we're 4 printings in. We're not changing it. Maybe in the CKG, we'll jam that rule in there somewhere. It has not seen the light of day, but it was kind of funny with just talking about the ascending armor classes. But that's one of the nice things about CNC and its simplicity, because that armor class system does kind of just merge with the Siege engine. Everything's high, your level's playing into everything, and go. So, and it's one of the things that it took me So after our release, I had a game. I've been running a game with these guys for decades, since 1984, 85. And I kept playing AD&D even after we released the Player's Handbook, until Mac and Davis were like, all right, we're not playing anymore until you do at least a few games with C&C. All right, fine. So we started a new one, and we hadn't looked back. I mean, I probably played AD&D half dozen times since that 2006, because the C&C it really does walk you right out of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Or honestly, and I'm not knocking any other of the systems, they're great. All the editions of D&D are fantastic systems. Fourth misfired a little bit, but I think that their heart was in the right place. The mechanics aren't bad; it just didn't hit. But C&C, no matter which version of D&D or whatever RPG you're playing, you can walk into it and you feel at home, very comfortably at home.
John, Max, I really don't know why your account is blocked. I must have you shadow blocked on my end too, so I have no idea why. So you'll just have to come in as yourself. I'm sorry. Yeah. So as Stephen here, Clow was mentioning, the barbarian class had changed. In there, and mentioned that was the one mechanical change, I guess, or class change, and the differences between printings, which I also have to train my brain around, actually saying, because I'm so used to saying editions. But it really is just because now that I have several different printings of each of the books, it is mostly like formatting and upgrading of art, which the art in Castles and Crusades is another thing that really modernizes it and makes it stand out above like some of the other OSR games that are out there. And I'll segue right into that. So like, how do you see Castles and Crusades fitting within your interpretation of OSR?
So the OSR movement, I'm relatively certain, kind of grew out of Castles and Crusades. Now, I think it was already headed that direction as the OGL was making its rounds, and more people were getting the idea of what you could do with the OGL. When the OGL first came out, the Open Gaming License, for those who don't know, when it first came out, we all just kind of assumed it was attached to Wizards of the Coast. Fast forward a couple of years later, and people are realizing this is a license that you can kind of do anything with. But Castles and Crusades, a lot of the guys who were in our playtesting went on to do OGL material, like Sword and Wizardry. Finch, he was one of the early playtesters of Castles and Crusades. And there were some disagreements on the directions we were taking from some of these guys, and that's fantastic. And they went on their own way. So we kind of predate the OSR movement. And I was very, in the early years of marketing Castles and Crusades, I was very careful to not associate with OSR, not because of any bad connotations. I know it had trouble a couple of years ago about something. I didn't follow much of that. But in the early days, it was just old school gaming, right? This is just the way we used to play. It's great. It's fantastic stuff. But because so many of the OSR publishers were smaller, and we were deep into distribution because of Gary Gygax and our D20 footprint. I didn't want to be associated with smaller publishers. I wanted to be associated with larger publishers like Wizards of the Coast and whatnot. So we focused on our branding was Castles and Crusades. This is what we're doing. Castles and Crusades is it's a role-playing game in and of itself, so much so that Gary Gygax is releasing his long-awaited Castle Zaggig with, Castles and Crusades. So we just kind of focused in that direction and the OSR then developed, flowered and blossomed in its own right, doing a multiple number of games that captured a variety of, spirits, I suppose, of old school gaming. Because old school gaming is there's so many ways. We didn't have, and this because you started gaming in the 70s. A lot of the guys in this channel knows there wasn't any direction on how to do this. It was just books that kind of gave you an idea of make a character do an adventure. What adventure are we supposed to do? So you just started doing shit, and you started making it up as you went along, especially in the early days. So the idea of an old school game to me is really an old school philosophy, which is this is the way you just make it up. If there's a gap, you don't worry about it. You fill it, you fix it.
Right.
Or you disagree, you change it. I remember this was a huge eye opener. So this is going to be, so I'm a Gen Xer, started gaming in 75, 76, something like that, born in 67. So I met this is going to be this is during D20, so 2004 probably. I met this young guy, so he's going to be a millennial. He's probably 15 or something at the time. And he's at the booth and he's shopping through some of our D20 stuff. And he says to me, well, I finished Dungeons and Dragons. And I was like, you what? My brain is like, what? What do you mean? How do you finish Dungeons and Dragons? And he goes, well, I finished all the adventures. And I said, huh? And my brain literally said, no, you what do you do? Make a new character, start your own adventures. What are you doing? Well, when I got to talking to the kid, he just assumed that the stuff released by Wizards of the Coast was the game. And when you've played those modules, you're done. Go play Monopoly or, whatever video game you're doing. And it was such an interesting concept. It was the first time I kind of met with younger gamers. There's such a plethora of content out there. And there's so many rules covered in so many nuances in books that are now gigantic that the idea of kind of cutting out on your own it's not forced upon you. It was forced upon us, right?
Right.
I'm not saying we're any more creative than they are today. We just didn't have anything. There were like 6 books, so that were very skeleton. So I think that was kind of the first big eye opener that people are not playing like old school gamers because they have so much content. And then, so this is probably about 5 or 6 years ago that I began to shift our focus a little bit back into pushing the element of, and this is where some of you who have followed TLG for a while, pushing the element of this is your game. Make it your game. If you don't like this rule, change this rule.
Right.
If this doesn't work, this is yours. Own it. And that became our slogan for a little bit. Well, Castles and Crusades, it's your game. Own it. And that kind of philosophy shifted away, or shifted sort of back into what old school gaming was like. And in that regards, I think we kind of did this weird full circle, back to back to our roots and back into the old school movement.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there was ever like a demographic like study. So I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that our generation, those of us that started playing in the 70s, late 70s, introduced by either D&D or AD&D, at the time, I think we were probably younger than the newer gamers of today. I think that their entry point is closer to high teens or even low 20s, college age students. And maybe that's why when we came in as, 10 and 11 year olds, I mean, and you started even younger than me. That's why we weren't, the book rules wonks, tearing through that stuff and just creating, crazy stuff right off, just off the cuff. I know, like, maybe my second character in AD&D First Edition was a lizard man fighter because I loved the illustration and the monster manual. I was like, I want to play a lizard man. My DM was like, sure, fine, go right ahead. I mean, we didn't have any we didn't have any rules about it or anything like that. It was just like, all right, you're just going to be, this. And then, over time, he started saying, yeah, you probably wouldn't be able to, they'd have a hard time speaking to you or understanding your speech because even though you're speaking common, you can't pronounce the same words the way that they would be pronounced. And so he started adding, challenges, to that kind of thing. It wasn't very charismatic, which is another thing. I think he went along the lines and said, I'm going to reduce your charisma, he says, because that doesn't make sense that you would have that high, in this thing. So anyway, it was like we just created crap and just went from.
There's this moment, I remember it, and I tell this story frequently. So I'm pretty sure we're still in the Brown book, so it may be a mix. I can't remember, but my character had a Vorpal sword, and Davis, my brother, loves dinosaurs, and I roll a natural 20 on this Tyrannosaurus Rex, and of course, I get to decapitate it. And I remember his face is like, No. You're not decapitated. And at that point forward, there was this break in Davis that he began, like your DM. Well, if you're a lizard man, no, you can't really speak well. You're not, but you start creating this whole subset of rules for your own game that just over time become this thing. And I think I've never heard that before, but I think you are spot on. I think the age entry is probably drastically different.
Yeah.
Which impacts, just the level of when you're a child, the rules aren't all set yet. I'm not just talking about rules for games. The rules for life aren't set, right? You don't know when you stub your toe, it's going to hurt. When you're 22, you know it's going to hurt.
Right.
You don't want to do it, and it hurts worse when you do it.
Yeah.
So I think that when you're young, when you're that young, and a lot of people did start very, very young. And like I said, I honestly don't remember. Davis said we got the books in 75. He didn't know we played war games together. He and I did that, Avalon Hill games. And he didn't know what to do with it, so he put it in the closet, and it sat there for months until, for whatever reason, he revisited it. So sometime in 76, we started playing it. That's what he said.
Right.
But I didn't have anything to do with it. He just told me, here's your characters, name them. My first character's name was Tarzan because I read Tarzan books in those days. But I think that probably impacts the way people view the game. Now, I will say this is very fascinating. We're having a debut show tonight. Scarlett, you can see all the information on our website. Chuck's got it everywhere. She's streaming for her first time. She's shifting from 5th edition, which I'm sure she's still going to play. But for us, she's going to be running a Castles and Crusades game tonight, 3-hour game. Now, she's got 3 players in it. And they did a special 1-shot, 5th edition 1-shot for us during a Kickstarter we did a few months ago. And I watched these 3 players in this DM run this game, and it was the craziest thing. And it was just hilarious. It reminded me of old school gaming is what it did, because these people were doing stuff that's not in the rules, and they kept having to stop and say, okay, how are we going to do this? Make a check, whatever. And I told them afterwards, really the way you guys are playing, that's Castles and Crusades. You need that siege engine because you can try anything you want, and the CK has an immediate response. It doesn't even have to be a logical response, right? You can just make a charisma check. Why charisma? Because I said make a charisma check. Make a charisma check. Yeah. And so I think watching these young players as they grow into the game, and I mean the role-playing game in general, is really cool because they really are doing what we did in the olden times and just kind of going with it. 3rd edition was a little bit different. 3rd edition, a fantastic game, and it really rejuvenated the market. You can't deny that. But they shifted to the heavy technical. It was more to make sure everything was kind of explained on the battlefield, and whatnot, which slowed the whole progress down. Good in its day when it was released, but it became a little bit cumbersome as they added more and tried to fix more and whatnot. And it just kind of takes that creative play out. And at the end of the day, the advantage of an RPG over all other gaming systems, and this is by a long, 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 long stretch, is the creative play. You can just try it, and do what you want.
Okay, I'm going to actually address this question here from Ironcaster. So do you follow, I guess this is to you, Stephen, do you follow the OSR scene now? And are there any trends in the OSR that you've taken notice of?
I don't follow it too much. I did kind of in the beginning, but one of the things that I try to take in moving Castles and Crusades forward is to make sure that Castles and Crusades is its own vehicle and isn't relying upon anything else that is going on out there in the way other things are doing it. There's a design philosophy that goes into it and carries over into the world of Erid. It carries over into everything that we do. And part of that is, and this is your game, own it, that type of approach. And me personally, and I can't speak for what goes on in the OSR community, but personally, I don't like to debate mechanics and which version of this is better and which. I remember one of the funniest conversations I ever had. Castles and Crusades releases, we got rave reviews, and this guy was just online, just loving the game, and he kept going on about this is just like the mold version of D&D. And I responded a few times, but I didn't know what that was. So I emailed Gary and I said, Gary, I have no idea. They're listing all of these versions. What are they talking about? So he gave me this very brief history of what all of these versions were. And to me, that was this huge eye opener that Castles and Crusades actually is the game you want it to be. If you're a second edition fan, you're going to love Castles and Crusades because you can mold it to second edition. If you're a third edition or fourth or fifth or whatever edition you are, you can mold CNC just enough so that you feel like you're at home. So with that in mind, all of that in mind, and I haven't like actively avoided the OSR community. I don't have anything against it. A lot of good friends of mine are part of that community, but I haven't followed it. I haven't followed it too much. I will say, who was it? The Old School Essentials popped up on my radar a couple of years ago. Their Kickstarter last year or 2 years ago, I can't remember.
Yeah,
it did really, really well. And theirs seems to be really kind of the embodiment of the OSR movement as I don't even like the idea of movement. It's really just it's really just a spirit, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, I actually about a year or so ago, I thinking about OSR, and I was like, well, OSR means something different to everyone, and the old school is universal, right? Everyone, old school. I said, but I started differentiating what the R stands for. So I say, well, you have old school role playing, and that's the style and essence of the game mechanics that we used to play with, and it was grittier, a little bit more dangerous, that kind of it was more homebrewing, and just the way that you ran your games. That's old school role playing to me. Dungeon crawling over being a barista in a coffee shop. I mean, it was just and more open to heroic fantasy. All right. So that's old school role playing to me. Then there's old school Renaissance, where you're taking Renaissance just means a rebirth, right? So you're taking the word Renaissance and you're saying, well, I'm making a new game that is, still connected to an older game. All right. It's still, you could still see the essence of the older game tied into it. And then you have old school, you have the retro clones, basically, which is really a 90%, and then 10% tweaked, and that's really the full embodiment of the OGL. Is that what do you need? Like 10 to 20% has to be unique, or even less in some cases.
All it has to be is 5% has to be open content. That's it.
Open content, and then everything else could be direct copied. So I started thinking of it, in those terms, and Castles and Crusades, and that's why I asked, like, how is it really an OSR game? And it seems more like it just naturally evolved out of what was already there. And so it's, in many ways, it could be the precursor to OSR, or it was at the very, very beginning as you described it. And so it doesn't fall into that same kind of interpretation of what OSR stands for now. I see Castles and Crusades as being something wholly different, in that it was a natural extension. I've seen some people describe it as AT&T third edition, which is which may be a fair way of looking at it too. And if you look at it that way, then it's not really an OSR game. It's a natural extension of AT&T, second edition. It's now the third edition. So, and I'm sure you're comfortable with that. I really like that interpretation of it as well, because being a big fan of AT&T, I just say, hey, this is the modern, evolution of that whole game philosophy and game mechanics, even though it's simplified compared to that. But that's the modernization aspect of it, and that's what I really like about it. So, but it's a great question, Ironcaster. That I'm sure that we could spend, weeks upon weeks of going back and forth, just trying to deconstruct the term OSR and then see how
it's been very interesting to watch the OSR movement develop over the past, decade and a half. But I think that's an extraordinarily apt description of CNC, and it fits with my own kind of gaming trajectory. Also, I mean, because like I said, I don't really know. And Davis, when I'm talking to him, Davis is 2 years older than me, and when I'm talking to him, he'll say things like, we were talking a couple weeks ago. I was up at his farm, and he said something about one of the box sets. I can't remember which box set it was. He goes, "Yeah, we were using blah blah," and I don't remember that at all. I have no memory of any of that. I remember the player's handbook. I remember the the monster manual, because I was at Sears with him when he bought that. I do remember that. But I never saw it again, right? It was, and I do remember when he gave me the player's handbook, said, "You need to read this." It was the demon cover, that thing. I kind of missed whatever hybrid material he was, whatever. So when you say old school to me, I really don't think AD&D. When you say old school to me, in my brain, I think the little bitty books. That's kind of what I think, the little brown books, and maybe the basic set. But didn't even the basic set come out after AD&D, or did it come out before?
Basic, you mean Holmes edition came out the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, so around 78, 79, Holmes edition came out. Around 78, I know that the monster manual for AD&D came out first. All right.
Right.
And that was a design philosophy of Gary Gygax. He felt that, first you have to understand the monsters before you can understand the game system that's built around them. And so that came out first, then the player's handbook, and then finally the DMG. And so I guess that was between like 78 through 80. That's when those 3 books in that order came out. So Holmes was around the same time. I mean, I could grab my copy of it and look, but it's hard to tell because they put the printings, they put, they go 74, 75, 76,
Right.
So it's like hard to know whether they're just saying like they're still connecting them all the way through,
Right.
So it's hard to say when something came out because of the way that they do that. It's so again, I think that they ran parallel, and
I think they did.
And then BECME, which is Frank Metzner's his editions and his box sets, they were intentionally run parallel to AD&D, and I'm not going to get into the whole rift between Arneson and Gygax and
Right.
why AD&D went on a separate track and everything like that. I see them both as co-equal founders of the hobby, and or certainly the hobby as we know it, because the hobby actually existed before them as well, but they certainly brought it to the mainstream, and through Arneson's ideas and Gary's marketing and packaging,
Right.
and that's really how I look at it, so I have great respect for both. I don't think that they should ever, one name should never be dropped, from the other when you're talking about the contributions to the hobby that we are all so immersed in, and that there's no other way to describe that either. I mean, whether we're, publishing ourselves or this is our number one hobby, and pastime, and this is our leisure time that we devote countless hours to, and much to the chagrin of probably our spouses or everybody else around him. I mean, I still get you're 55 years old and you're playing games. It's like it's like,
but
well,
they're fun.
yeah. Well, I was a nerd at 10 and I'm still a nerd at 55. That hasn't changed. So, but anyway, it's just, they are so integral to what the hobby is that I don't see separating either of them. And the hobby has, gone through these ebbs and flows. And I mean, you brought up several times, like the the D20 collapse, which I guess was hitting around, like, OGL was made for a reason,
Right.
and I don't think it was just the disgruntled, employee, that left WotC for Paizo at the time that created this to, really muddy the waters, but there was a need for it at the time. And the need for it was that the hobby, I don't think, could have survived with just one standard bearer. It had to broaden.
I mean, yeah, it was on a hard path to a niche game, lost to the ether. And I remember, so Mac is unlike me. He really enjoys following all the trends, all of the stuff. Not sure if he still does like he did, but back in the 1990s, the late 90s, I was actually trying to get published with TSR, sending him some modules and whatnot. And Mac was working on these designs, and he was getting into this, the new, I don't even know what they're called, with the message boards. I didn't get a computer, whatever. I got one late, but he was into all this stuff, and he got into these conversations with other D&D players. And then he got in, because he's in the legal community, he got permission to join the discussion that was going on about the creation of the OGL back in 98, 99, whatever that is. And part of the philosophy was, and I'm really in kind of deep waters at this point, because I wasn't in those conversations, vaguely remembering what he said at Vino's when we met. Part of the philosophy behind the OGL was that all of the smaller things like adventures are expensive but don't sell well. So if we can get 500 little companies publishing these small things, it will drive people to buy Dungeons and Dragons. That was the philosophy of it. Open it up to everybody, and it was based upon some computer software, open gaming licenses that had gone out. It was meeting with some success, I suppose. So when the OGL releases, you get this sudden jump in. We were one of the first, if not, we were in the first. There was 3 or 4 of us at Gen Con 2000. It was us, Atlas Games, and a couple of others, Necromancer Games. I can't remember who else, who used the OGL to release these books. And that was great in 2000. And then by 2001, it's just absolutely exploding. The hobby, releasing the OGL, succeeded. It, beyond anyone's wildest dreams. That and the 3rd edition of the game was built to appeal to people, and Wizards of the Coast marketed it really, really heavily, pushed it in every which direction. So suddenly there was a renaissance, this explosion in sales all over the place, which drew more people into the business by 2002 and 2003. I remember, I think it was 147 companies were publishing D20 material simultaneously. And a very, very good friend of mine in distribution, he started his own consolidatorship using Gary Gygax's Canting Crew from Trollord Games to kind of kickstart his business. So we're still very, very close to this day. But I remember him telling me, I started getting these kind of inklings that retailers are getting backlogged and stuff that they can sell. They're ordering deep, but they're not moving as much. And that's when John Nephew told me there's signs of stress, through the community. Right. Consumers are now, there's such a glut. There's so much to consume that they're not able to do it. And consequently, they've been playing D&D for 3 or 4 years, and they're figuring out that they can do their own stuff, right? You need, the longer you play an RPG, the less you need. Right. Because you're doing your own stuff. You're making your own world. Right. And then by 2004, at the bottom, or 2004, 2005, the bottom just completely fell out. I remember talking to a distributor up in Canada, and he had 3 of those long dumpsters he had to pull in and just threw. Wow. Mountains of RPG, because he couldn't move it and he couldn't store it anymore. He needed the space. It's very interesting how very, very quick. But I think the OGL, you talk about ebbs and flows. AD&D was the first one, and it did amazingly beautiful. The artwork was great, and the game was cool. Everything about it, and it was very timely. If you look at the Epic magazine, Heavy Metal, the comic books, all of the stuff that was going on at that time, from Fritz to Cat, all the way, all over the place. It was rough. Everything was rough, right? It wasn't defined. So AD&D's art, though, people can look at it and say, "Oh, but it was timely. It was what was going on when we were kids." So it explodes. And 2nd edition, I think it ebbed somewhat. It tried to capture that didn't for whatever reason. Third edition explodes. Fourth edition tried a different direction. It did not work at all. And fifth edition managed to really capture that imagination again. And we've got this third ebb now really going on.
Yeah, it's that was a very interesting time, and I remember, just as a side note, around that same time, like the early '90s. I mean, the economy was crap in the early '90s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really started nosediving from '89 through, I guess, '91, '92. It was probably not until like '94 that it started bouncing back again. But I remember the sports card industry totally collapsed, especially the collectibles and everything. Like Topps almost went out of business at the time. Comic book stores were closing because comic book stores at the time, just like it is now, their bread and butter was the sports cards resales, and busting up the boxes and selling off the special cards and everything like that. And once people like companies like Topps and Score was another one, they started just bombarding print runs like crazy, and D&D was also, that's when they came out with the TSR was producing those cards, their D&D cards, and tons of them with all and once that bottom fell out, they, the comic book stores started closing because their bread and butter was gone. Yeah. You go into gaming shops now, and you can see that if Magic the Gathering ever collapsed, you'd see everything fall apart.
Oh yeah, it would be rough. It would be very rough.
That is their bread and butter. Magic the Gathering or other, but mostly Magic the Gathering. That's the local gaming stores' bread and butter. If that ever collapsed, you'd see everything just, disappear. We'd be back to, just buying stuff on Lulu. And
right. It would be insanely rough. I remember that when 4th edition came out, and I'm really not harping on 4th edition. I never played the game. I'm sure it's a fine edition if that's the style of gaming you play. But when it came out, it sold very poorly, very, very poorly. They retooled the OGL so that it made companies like Troll Games very difficult to support it. So we didn't. There's a whole bunch of copyright issues we're going to have to deal with, and at that point, CNC was doing good enough. I was like, we're not going to do that. But what we did see, and I experienced this in the revenue streams, we watched as 4th edition collapsed. On one hand, you're thinking, oh, this is, we can fill the gap. This is great. People are going to be looking for RPG. That's not at all what happened. What happened was retail shops who maybe 10% of their business is a role-playing game. They're going to do 8% D&D and 2% all these other things because they want to have a little bit of variety in there. But when that 8% goes away, they drop the 2% as well. So we saw stores dropping RPGs across the board. Our retail sales just nosedived just right in with 5th edition. Now we saw an increase in direct sales, which was interesting. But that's because people were looking for something different, couldn't find it in their stores because of these trends. I mean, and it is interesting how what you say about Magic the Gathering is spot on. If that was for whatever reason, headed out, it would be catastrophic through the industry for at least 3 or 4 years.
And until something else came along that filled that exact same niche, because I don't think RPGs, tabletop RPGs, will ever compete to combat card games.
Well, they can't. At the end of the day, the funny thing about what I do, and I do this for a living, is once you buy the player's handbook, you don't have to buy another one, right? I mean, you're done. So I, as a publisher, I have to find new customers all the time, new fans of the game, new whatever it is. But cards, you're constantly buying cards because you want the special ones. It's like I keep telling Tim and Chuck, we need to start making food or something that we all could just consume. But, I mean, that's kind of the thing. And I am the poster child for the worst RPG customer of all time. I probably did not buy. I've played AD&D since it came out. I probably didn't buy my first AD&D book until the mid '80s because I just used Davis's. He kind of stopped playing. I started using his stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's because you can do that. It's not like other hobbies. It's
Right.
not, it's.
Well, they're what I know. I mean, the RPG Pundit actually calls it the Evergreen. These were evergreen systems. They were designed to be, you could buy the books and continue playing them for the next 40 years. I mean, literally, my first edition books are, even though I replaced them all, over the last couple of years, but they're still the 40-year-old printings, and I still use them to this day. And I could probably use them another 20 years before they completely fall apart.
You can do what Charlie did. Charlie played my game up until just a few years ago, and when we played AD&D, his player's handbook was falling apart. So he took a knife and he cut the strings off and a hole punched it, and to this day it's in a binder.
Yeah.
He probably got that in 81 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's like and because of the rulings over rules, you could lose a couple of those pages and still continue to function without any problem. It's like, so it's a, it really is an interesting hobby in that, you can find people kind of, still playing the same versions of the game for 40 years. You can find people that bounce from, game to game to game, genre to genre. They play for, 6 sessions and move on to something else, or, people coming and going. I know in a recent question that was part of the RPG a day, questions, they said one of the questions was that, what would you do to bring new people to the hobby, or more people to the hobby, I should say. And my interpretation of it, or just my experience from it, is that the hobby's good. The hobby's been around. I don't think that there'll ever be a time when there are no people playing, tabletop role-playing games. I mean, they're, because of that evergreen nature of it, because the fact that there's people like us that will, still be playing the same game system for 40 years.
It's funny. A few years ago, I walked by my son's desk, and he's always playing computer games, and the computers are in the kind of the family area and whatnot. And every time I'd walk by the desk, he'd be playing a different game. I mean, something different. And they were the wildest. One was strings, where you eat other strings. One was circles bouncing around. Some of them are like, full laser guns, whatever, magic. I don't know. There's so many different games. And I remember asking him at one point, and he just started babbling about all of these games that are available now on Steam and all this other stuff. And it hit me then that younger people are just like us. They're just gamers. They just I think there's something in the human nature, the way our brains are wired. Maybe it's, I don't know what it is, a primeval instinct to accept risk. I don't know what it is, but it's all sort of gambling, I suppose. I don't know, but we love the game. We just, as a species, we love to game. So I can't imagine a scenario in which it goes away. And I think that, and this is one of the things that TLG has been, one of the reasons we're on Twitch, one of the reasons we're trying to push into younger players, because they game already. They're already in the hobby. They're just not playing what we're playing, AD&D or whatever it is. They're playing video games. But they're still gaming, and I've converted, not converted, but my 2 sons and my 2 nephews, we now do a Sunday game that they started playing, and they love the role-playing game. They love the books. We've just announced an app will be out in the next few months where you can do all of your character stuff on your phone. They don't want anything to do with that. They want the paper and the pencils and the dice and the books in front of them because they've got video games. They already play video games, right? This is a different style of game. And then one of the things that I told them as they were getting started, I'm a huge fan of GTA. I love Grand Theft Auto. Absolutely love that game. But the funny thing about GTA, and I'll do this sometimes when I'm just bored, if you get a plane and you just fly, right? Yeah. You just keep going, or a boat. Eventually, you just die. Your plane falls out of the sky, and you're dead. And I was telling the guys, I said, this doesn't happen in a role-playing game. You can go as far as you want and for eternity, drinking potions of longevity or whatever. So the sky's the limit. And I think it takes Younger gamers a little bit longer to figure this out, 2 or 3 sessions to figure out the sky is the limit and they can do whatever. And it's one of the things I think that sets, and to do a hard pitch in the middle of all this, one of the things I think that sets Castles and Crusades apart from the other RPGs, because it really, the mechanic is so simple and we don't encumber it with any of our own, rules or any of that other stuff. That's in the Castle Keeper's Guide and the Codex Verde. There's more to it. But if you're just playing the Siege engine, it's kind of unencumbered, and it takes what's best in all of these RPGs and allows you to grow into the game that you want to play, because you're going to play a game probably slightly different than I play a game.
Right.
And having a system that kind of makes you play this way, it's a little bit restrictive. And you I contend that you let just anybody go, whether they're old school gamers or young or someone in the middle. You give them the freedom to do what they want, and even beyond that. I tell people all the time, if you're new to Castles and Crusades, play it for at least 4 or 5 games, because it's going to take you. You're going to have to, especially the players, more so than the CK. You're going to have to rewire your brain a little bit, so when you're playing, you won't be looking at your sheet. I was given an instruction, this stream that we're doing tonight, all 4 of these people are coming over from 5th edition. They've just started gaming 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
And I was talking about the attribute check system and how it works. And so the one guy said, so like to swim the river, I'm going to make an athletics check. And I said, no. There's no athletics checks. There's none of that. If you're going to swim the river, the CK is going to say, make an X attribute check. They're going to pick the attribute. It can be Dex. It can be intelligence. It can be anything. And the CK, Scarlett, got in on it immediately. She said, yeah, I could make them make an intelligence check, because maybe they can look at the river and understand the currents and the speed of it. There you go. You don't have to justify it in CNC. There's nowhere in this. Right. All it says is the CK is going to tell you to make an attribute check. But if you want to justify it, fantastic. So they were already warming into this system that it is. And I think that's one of the things that really sets the game apart. The mechanic is what Mac and Davis designed it to be. It is that simple, and it is that malleable that you can go in any direction. So if you played the Moldvay version, or you played the Mincer version, or you played AD&D, when you step into, or 5th edition or 4th, when you step into Castles and Crusades, you feel at home. I've played this before, but now I can do it with a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you just reiterated what I had said, much earlier on, was that's that real flexibility with the system, where, it really just comes down to, you're just playing, you're just, so playing, you're just playing. Don't think too much about it. Don't ask, can I try to do this? Just say, this is what my character is going to do. And the CK will do, the rest, tell you, all right, this is what you need to roll against. And, you just go and describe whether you succeeded or not. And, and we move on from there. So it's less looking at the character sheet. The only thing you need to know is what your attributes are, and really, of those, which ones are your, I just drew a blank on which ones are your prioritized ones, which ones are, which ones are, which ones are your primary, and then the rest are secondary, basically. Although just as an aside, on Roll20, I'm using a character sheet that somebody made for Castles and Crusades, and it keeps on filling in the tertiary, things. And it was like, there's no third layer of it. Why do they keep on putting this in there? I was like, it's driving me nuts. I had to go in there to keep on removing it every time.
So I heard, I'm partially into addressing this. So we've been making, in the last year or so, we've been making a pretty hard drive to get CNC on a variety of VTT platforms: Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, Foundry, and Shard. So we're kind of pushing in all these directions. Well, I don't do any of that. I've never played any of the VTT, so I'm really kind of out of my water when Chuck is talking to me about it, because Chuck's heading up all that. And Wayne told me the other day, the guy heading up the Roll20 stuff, he said he thinks there's 2 character sheets on Roll20, the one we've designed, and then one that someone else has designed. And
Right.
I just sent Roll20 yesterday an email saying, "Hey, are there 2 character sheets? So you may have the second character."
Yeah, I have the second one. I probably the older one,
Right.
and it's because I haven't seen yours on there yet, and I mean that really helps us segue into the next thing because I did I did back your Kickstarter for the app, so is that eventually going to become the link to one of these VTTs or?
So my understanding is, and I've talked to Scott quite a bit about this, and again, I get out of the language when he's an app developer and I'm not. If you look at my phone, the only app I have on there is TikTok and the TLG store. So and it's not that I don't like technology. I have no patience with passwords. So I try to remove things from my life that make me very angry, and passwords make me very angry. But so at any rate, the idea behind the app, it should go on phones and desktops, Apples and PCs. And I believe, and if Chuck's still with us, he should be able to answer this. I believe that it's going to be usable with the others, but I don't think like you would import the app to Roll20. That I don't think you would do.
Okay.
But you could have it all there, compatible with the idea behind the app. And he's just doing the. And he's just doing the player centric at the moment, is to have a fully functional so that when you go up a level, everything goes up with you and you've got it there on your phone. And so that's the idea. And really the language escapes me because there's so many of them, but like Roll20 has a character sheet, right?
Yes. Like I said, the broken one that has, that has tertiary.
Fantasy Grounds has something else, and I think Foundry has a character. There's enough nuance, I think, that they've all kind of got to be, and it gets jumbled in my head as to which VTT is which. In fact, we're releasing today, isn't it, Chuck, or is it Monday? I think we're releasing the Foundry Alpha today. I believe that'll be rolling.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Just lots of stuff, and that's kind of the cool thing about the market today. There's so many people gaming in so many directions. I mean, it's a little bit more difficult from our perspective because we have to put all of this stuff together. But man, gamers are just, what is that from Jurassic Park? Life will find a way. Gamers will find a way, and that's what they're doing. So Chuck says, as far as the character manager working with VTTs, our option, if we can make it happen, would be an export in the proper format so the character could be imported in the VTT of choice. Okay, so there you go. That is the plan at the moment. You can import it into your VTT platform.
I just wanted to shout out to Goldie. Hey, thanks a lot. I will certainly put that to very, very good use. Probably buy something from Trollord Games. I'm waiting for my next shipment, which will come, mid vacation. So, but then I'll start taking a look at.
Hopefully soon. One of the things that's happened, we're going to have to put an announcement up. So we've been delivering to this post office for 15 years. We used to do an old one, and about 15 years ago we shifted this. So Veronica, who runs it, I know her very well. We talk all the time and all this stuff. Well, she was telling me they don't scan them on site anymore. They send them to Memphis where it goes to a larger thing, the media mail. Now, everything else they have to scan. So when we ship stuff, media, it just kind of goes out into the ether for about 3 or 4 days until it finally gets scanned. It's kind of nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Well, I'm in a very small town in, like a northern central part of New York, so our post office is a 1-car post office kind of thing, slightly above a pony. So I used to have to tell people, it was like, yeah, but it takes like 10 days to get to me, even from New York to New York. It takes 10 days to get to me. Wow. And it's like, once it hits that, it becomes, and if there's any discrepancy, it gets sent back to sender. I'm like, what? How does this happen? And just the routes coming to me too. It's like, I was like, all right, it's in Newburgh, New York. It's coming here, it'll be here soon. And then it goes to Massachusetts, and then Pennsylvania, then to Albany, and then back to finally my thing. I was like, what the hell happened here? It just did the Bermuda Triangle around my post office to get here.
Tell you, I'm sure there's some folks out there that work for the post office, but I go in that post office all the time. It's either me, Wilson Tots, and whoever's bringing the packages up. We fill it in a cart, we roll it in there. so the ladies don't have, because they're books, it's 50 boxes or 20, it's heavy, so we don't do whatever. So we push that stuff in there, and I have no idea how they manage that. All these packages, I'm like, oh my Lord, it's a miracle people get their packages. So hats off to the post office. I mean, really hats off.
Now, this actually prompts another question to me. So, so you have a background, or at least, actual training in history, right? You have I
have my master's degree in history, and I was working on my PhD when Trollworld started to pick up speed, and I decided to step out of that field and give this a go.
Yeah, because gaming is so much more exciting than history, which I have a master's in history as well. So it's like, gaming is much more exciting.
I saw this this very, very reluctant generation of historians, reluctant to retire. So I didn't see the job prospects as being, huge.
That's the thing. Like in this profession, I'll say, even though I just retired, it's like when you become a history, when you go into history, it's to either author books or to teach the next generation of historians. It becomes like a perpetual motion machine. That's all you really do. It's like you're either writing or you're doing. There's very little.
So let me interrupt you. I'm going to insult a whole bunch of people, including myself. There's this episode of Archer. I don't know if you've ever seen the cartoon, where he's with this guy who's I think he's an anthropologist, someone who studies spiders, whatever.
Yeah.
And the guy says, well, Archer goes, who's this secret agent? He goes, well, he starts laughing. So what do you do with that? And he goes, well, I teach. And he goes, oh, so you teach other people to become an anthropologist? So the circle of uselessness continues.
That's what it is.
I just fell over laughing. It was so funny because it was me. So
it's like, when you have a master's or a PhD in history, and then you say, but I don't want to teach. They're like, well, what the hell else are you going to do with it? There's nothing really else you could do with it, unless you're going to take that to game design and write these codexes like and that's the other thing that I find really unique about Castles and Crusades is you do have all these codexes that are, there's the Nordic one, the Egyptian one, and so on, the Roman and such. And is that I guess that's bringing those into your world setting, or are they, because I haven't dug into your world setting yet. That's my vacation reading. Yeah. But
so there's two history's kind of played into two things here at Troller Games. So the first major impact it's had, and it's been really an almost unmeasurable impact, is the first hardcover book we printed was the Codex of Erd. And that came out in 2001. Gary Gygax did a very small piece for that to help promote and sell. So it was going to be a tie into stuff that he was doing. And the Codex of Erd, when you get into it, I think that's you're talking about reading, right? Is the Codex of Erd. It's got about 120 pages of history. Yeah. And the reason that's there is I'm a huge Greyhawk fan. I absolutely love Greyhawk. Davis bought the folio edition back in 79 or 80, whenever that thing came out, and I never left it. When I play Greyhawk, I pull that battered, mangled folio thing out. Yeah. I bought From the Ashes, but I never played it. I stuck with this thing because I had kind of developed my own history beyond what they had done and all of that stuff. But there was things that I didn't like about Greyhawk, not in the design, but in the presentation of it. For instance, you have an elf that's 1,000 years old. I really don't have any way for that player to orient themselves. We don't know what happened 1,000 years ago, other than this one line in that little kind of history. Right. So that went heavy into it. I thought, well, I want to start from the beginning. So no matter what you do in this game, even if you time travel, or if the GM is running something where you find this 3,000-year-old dungeon, you have a block of history that you can go to, and you know what happened, at least to give you directions to go. So that tied into the history of the Codex of the world of Erd. And then for each of those countries, I think there's 30 of them in there, I tied that to the history. Right. And then one of the things that I've always liked, like Richard the Lionheart, we all know the name. Well, why is he Richard the Lionheart? Why is there a William Longboat? Well, there's reasons for this. So when I created NPCs like that in the world of Erd, I created history as to why things are called the things that they are, so that the CK, the DM, can bleed that into their game as well and take those as adventure hooks and all of that. So all of that study that I did and the work in history really paid off. I mean, it kind of gave me a foothold from, ancient Greece to wherever to going on. And just to let everybody know, my focus was European history. So I can't really talk about Sumerian or, Chinese, really way out of my field. So I don't talk about it. But so I started from the beginning and went. Now that's the Codex of Eric. Now we have a series of, and that's the World of Eric. We have a series of books called the Mythos series. And that's Codex Celtarum, Slavorum, Nordica, Classicum, Egyptium, and there's another one in there, I'm forgetting. And we got more coming out. And when Brian, I conceived those books as a line back in 2001. We originally hired Rob Kuntz to write them, starting with Codex Germania. He kind of bailed on us and didn't do it. So they kind of sat forever. I kind of wish I had taken them over, but somewhere around 7 or 8 years ago, Peter Bradley, our art director, introduced me to Brian Young, this PhD study guy who's into Gaelic history. He's got his PhD in Gaelic history, and he speaks Gaelic and all this other stuff. And I thought, well, holy hell, this guy's perfect. This is it. So he wrote the Codex Celtarum. But one of the things I wanted him to do is I wanted him to write a brief history of this area so that gamers like you or me, when we pick this thing up, we don't really have to blend that with our world, but we have some kind of context as to where it came from. And with that context, you can place it in your own setting and keep the context of the mythos, the creation mythos with it, right? If it's a lot of desert, this is why there's a lot of desert and their mythos and all this other stuff, and you place it in desert. So he put a lot of real world stuff in there, and then he treated the mythos as if they're real world as well. And they turned out to be fantastic. Some of our best-selling books. They're just really great books. And you don't really have to take those and put them in Eric, but you can if you want. It's all
right. We have here, so yeah.
Pretty useless.
Malachi actually said, so he goes.
It's one of those things. It's all higher education is wonderful, but it sometimes it lacks the purpose that perhaps.
Yeah, they don't necessarily prepare you for, they don't tell you, well, by the way, this degree is not going to amount to anything in the outside world.
So I remember in 1985. So I graduated high school in 1985, and I went to college that autumn or whatever. And I remember when I became a history major because I was vaguely interested in history, and I have zero math skills. Hence my mechanics in game design never worked. And science, whatever. I don't like care. History kind of fascinated me. I had been reading biographies on Geronimo and whatever. So I had a nascent idea of history. So I became a history major. But I remember this. I wish I had taken a picture. On the wall in the history department was this gigantic flow chart, huge. History majors and the jobs that you can get. And it was just all of these jobs. And I thought, well, hell, we're golden, right? Those aren't jobs. I don't know what they were, but it was funny.
I thought you were going to say there was this huge poster map of the age of Hyboria. that would have been, I would have been in that class in a
that would have been probably
that's the kind of history I wanted to know.
I do remember once one of the job listings was corporate historians. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I don't know if Coke still does it, but long ago they had a 1-800 number on a Coke can, and I called it and I asked about how do you get a job as a corporate historian. And the lady was like, well, we have one corporate historian. Oh, my Lord. That's not a job market.
Yeah. When is he going to pass?
Exactly. Probably still there 30 years later. So.
Well, yeah, that was like, I mean, this is really off on the side. I small town, and they had a historical society. So, I was probably at the time, in my early 40s. When I went into this historical society, I no exaggeration, I was 50 years the younger of everybody else in the room. I was like, this is not the place for me. I was like, geez, and
it is funny. I used to be a part of the Great War Society, and it's mostly older people.
Oh my gosh. I'll never forget this one woman, very sweet lady. She was like, this was like in like maybe April or May. And she said, I'm going to have this barbecue in August. I hope you can make it. And I thought to my mind, I was like, I hope you make it too. I was like, but yes, being a history major is definitely, we're kind of in our own little niche there. And, again, it's probably why we do gravitate to RPGs and role-playing games, because there's the literacy that's in there, and the literature, and then you're pulling from real world, in many cases. Right. I mean, one of the major influences on me as a young person, other than just becoming a better reader because of role-playing games in general, was Twilight 2000. If I did not play Twilight 2000, and if my father wasn't a World War II veteran, I probably wouldn't have joined the Army in 1990. All right. I mean, and I really don't separate the two. Like, it was like my experience playing Twilight 2000 kind of, had that in my mind as a young person. And then, the fact that my father was a World War II veteran, when 1990 rolled around, July of 1990, and you see what's going on in Iraq and everything, I was like, well, I want to join. I want to be a part of that, and it was, role-playing games has that kind of entry point to just looking to go, and experience things, that might be like the real connection between, your gaming, and your real life, is just the way that it opens your mind to looking at other things, that you normally wouldn't do.
I think it does. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people with an interest in history gravitate to this kind of subject matter.
Yeah.
For that very reason. It's funny you joined in 90, because I joined in 90 as well. When the Gulf War broke out, I signed up in October. So it's historically speaking, I will bet you 10-1 that if I was to say something like the crossbow is better than the longbow, we could start a debate in this chat room fairly quickly. Because I think this game is, like you said, it's so filled with real world stuff. I mean, you can't get away from it. It's everywhere.
Wasn't there an arbalist that fired 2 miles? Effectively 2 miles?
Yeah,
in like North Africa or something like that. They discovered an arbalist that could fire effectively 2 miles.
Those crossbows were really useful. Extremely useful.
It was like the first anti-ship missile, in circa, BC 1000 or something like that. It's like,
I tell my son all the time, who's very interested in history, there's lots of evidence for lots of stuff, right? There's lots of sources. But the one of the things I do is I look anecdotally at what was going on at the time, knowing that humans are every bit as smart then as we are now. There's no difference, right? They're just as smart, capable of learning. And my argument on the longbow thing is the crossbow was used more than longbows. Why? Probably because it was more effective to the people in the day and age. I mean, that's just it. They know best. Who knows best? They know best. Same reason we use whatever the heck we use. What, Coke? I thought it was all Dr. Pepper. It is. Did I say Coke in somewhere? Oh yeah, there was a 1-800 number on the Coca-Cola can. So Davis drinks Coke. I drink Dr. Pepper. So Dr. Pepper is my. Dr. Pepper is one of my pivotal moments. I remember the day I had my first Dr. Pepper. It was a moment. So
the last Dr. Pepper I remember was amaretto getting dropped into a beer, chugging it down.
There you go.
So, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, try it. You'll see why it's a Dr. Pepper.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right, so another person that just picked up Castles and Crusades Player's Handbook, so
I got it. You mentioned earlier the covers. these tribute covers that we did are very interesting to me. So I think the reason that we did these, I remember discussing it with Davis, and I think that I was really wanting to do a tip of the hat to the OSR community because we never had really done that before. And I thought, it'd be nice just to tip hat to these guys who have loyally played this game for a gazillion years, and not just Castles and Crusades, I mean, just the hobby in general, and have stuck with it, like you and I have. So I sent Jason Walton the idea. I said, let's do the player's handbook, but do your own take. Don't do the same thing. I mean, go. We want it to have the echo of. So we did the player's handbook, and it was fantastic. I mean, it was just absolutely through the roof. So we launched the Kickstarter with that, and then it hit so well that everyone was clamoring for the CKG to do a tribute cover because that one was up for print too. All right, we'll do that. So we did the CKG. Now I absolutely, from a personal perspective, the player's handbook and the DM's guide, DMG with the Efreet on it, I absolutely, when I was a kid, I could stare at those covers, right? You could stare at them, and you could step into that world, and it was so cool. The monster manual, I did not like. I didn't like it at all. Nothing against the artist. It just didn't make sense to my brain.
Right.
All of these monsters were right here in the same, acre of ground. So but we got a lot of people clamoring for, say, hey, you've done these two, now you got to do the monster book.
Yeah.
I didn't want to because I didn't have any really fond memories of this thing, but I eventually acquiesced and started fine. Send it to Jason, and that monster tribute cover exploded. Absolutely exploded, which is just, it's amazing to me. Absolutely amazing to me.
Yeah, it's I mean, that's probably my favorite of the three, actually.
Yeah, that's
and I agree with you too that the original monster manual cover was almost like the less dynamic of the three.
Yeah,
like you really couldn't put yourself into that image.
Perfect, yeah.
But this new one just blasts out, as an homage to it, but it's just so, it really does just capture that, the essence of that one, and it adds that dynamic aspect of it that wasn't there in the original,
right?
So it's like one of the few occasions when you can kind of copy something and give it an homage to it and actually produce something better, and that's that's really what updating should be, when you take something and you just you add your own twist to it, and it ends up being better than the original. So yeah, those are phenomenal covers, and to have all, I can't wait to have all three of them and have them on my shelf and, go through them and use them, and just looking forward to it.
Well, I hope you have a lot of fun with the game.
Yeah.
I certainly have for a decade now, I guess, almost. Yeah, over a decade now.
Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you, Long Shot. Yeah. I got to say, I mean, it's really, it continues to amaze me. And now Jason's fired up his favorite. So we're working on the Codex of the Plains now. I'm elbow deep in that one, writing it. And I sent Jason Walton, the guy who did all the tributes. I said, we're going to do another one, but I got it right here. I need this cover, a tribute to this cover, which is one of my favorite AD&D of all time.
Right.
And that turns out to be his favorite cover. So I'm curious to see what's going to come our way.
Yeah. So that's going to be, again, I mean, you're sending me down the rabbit hole of having to get everything that comes out now. It's I'm limited in space, and I'm like, oh my gosh,
I know
I'm gonna have to start shifting things around and figuring out, all right, what gets relegated to the closet now.
I got to tell you, I'm sitting here talking to you this whole time, and about a year ago, I got back into vinyl. I bought myself a record player. I listened to YouTube forever, and I just got tired of the advertisements. I thought, you know what, I just need to go back to records. So I got a whole setup over here going on, but that Conan the Barbarian soundtrack on vinyl is hard to find. Yeah.
I actually have it in my closet. That's a disc plate. That's the metal thing, but I do have that vinyl in my, so that's part of my Robert E. Howard collection. My Robert E. Howard collection is huge. I mean,
Nice.
from the hardcovers and everything. The only thing I don't have is like the 1950s Gnome Press books. I don't have all of them. I have just a couple of them, but they're pricey as hell. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like I have the Wild Star books, that the three set of Wild Star books, and when they came down to $200 a piece, I was like, I have to get them. I just have to get them. I was like, no, this is normally $1,200 for the set. It's only $600 now. I got to get it. So that's probably the most expensive. Next to my white box, that's probably the most expensive thing I've bought. Hobby related. But yeah, I do have that. I do have that LP. Which is
you have the original, or did you get the remake?
I'll be right back. Let me grab it.
Yeah, I think the original was there. Surely there was original. There had to be an original.
Let me see what I got. I'll be right back.
All right. So long shot, my CNC shelf is filling up. I am the same. In the same boat. Yeah, it's a lot of books for a game that you just need the player's handbook. There's a lot that goes with it. Yes, the manual of the planes is far superior to Planescape. Great AD&D. It really, I liked Planescape. I gotta say, I really enjoyed Planescape. Very cool, but it was so much content that I couldn't. When we started plane travel, when the high level characters began plane traveling, they would spend an hour of gameplay in some of these planes. So I was constantly having to pull these books out, and I couldn't read all that material fast enough to make it playable. It's actually one of the things that I'm doing in the Codex of the Planes is I'm trying to make each plane very playable and very, very quick, so that as the CK, you can look at the first page and kind of know what you're doing, and then you can deep dive a little bit when you need to. But there's going to be a table that explains everything very, very quickly, just so that when your characters, if you're running games, how it is. They go all over the place. You've got the information, readily at your fingertips. That's kind of the design.
So this is the one that I have.
Okay, so I'm talking. All right, that's actually Holy Carolina. So we have the original of that one. Davis does.
Yeah.
The soundtrack to the movie Conan the Barbarian.
Oh, okay. Yeah. This is the comics. This is the Jewel of the Ages, side A, Shadow of the Stolen City, and then side B is the Thunder Dust and the Crawler in the Mist.
So Davis is a giant Conan fan, and he has that one. He's got a 45 of a Conan story. He's got the original Tolkien reading some of the Silmarillion and the Hobbit and the Return of the Kings. It's very. Have you listened to it?
No, it's still sealed.
Still wrapped. It is really.
Yeah,
cool.
It is still wrapped.
Yeah.
I think
ours is battered and mangled. And
the only thing, unfortunately, what they did was whoever originally owned it, they cut the tip off. So that when you put it against the wall, it wouldn't dent. I was like, what the, but hey, back then when I was a kid, I used to write the price of cards on the Michael Schmidt, the Mike Schmidt rookie card. It was like 50 cents.
So my oldest brother is Zane. It's Nikki, myself, Davis, and Zane. And all three of the brothers collected comic books. No, I didn't take care of them. Davis sort of did. But Zane, because he wanted everyone to know whose was what, took a Sharpie and wrote Zane Chenault on all of his comic books on the front, and it soaked through the first 3 pages. So they're not very valuable anymore.
Well, you see, again, that talks to what we were talking about earlier about we were younger, and I think we were younger when we were coming into all of these different hobbies, collectibles or tabletop RPGs or whatever. We were young. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. We just did whatever.
The funniest thing that ever happened to me with any of that stuff. I'm sitting on the couch. My dad's watching football. I don't know what he's watching. And I'm reading weird tales, weird war tales, or some comic book. I can't remember what it was. And there's these flies kind of buzzing around. And he gets up and goes, "Give me your comic book." And I gave him the comic book, and he rolled it up. And he swatted 4 or 5 flies, and then he gave me the comic book back. And I remember tearing the cover off and just throwing it down, and then started reading the comic. I still have that comic with no cover. I didn't think anything of it. Tear it off, throw it away.
Yeah. You know, the regrets that I have, you know, as I started rebuilding my collection, you know, because it's you know, around around 2000, you know, so around 2000, I got rid of everything. We're moving
Oh,
from an apartment, you know, and it was just like, I just got to get rid of all of this stuff,
right.
you know. And like I said, by 2015, I was like, crap, I'm going back into this. And let me try to, you know, just get everything. And fortunately, when I started buying some of my AD&D stuff, the market wasn't so crazy.
Right.
The market really got crazy when the big stink about Oriental Adventures came out, you know, and then all of a sudden everything started skyrocketing, like, you know, $100 for this, $80 for that, 120 for, you know, or even higher. I think like the 144 page deities and demigods is like $200, you know.
That's pretty stout.
And I was like, wow, you know, I felt, you know, excited as hell when I got it for like 120, you know. And I was like, wow, you know, I just saved myself $80, you know.
Right.
And but you know, to have, you know, replaced virtually everything, you know, I found some of my cartoon action figures at my mother's house, you know, going through the basement and everything while we were moving
They
her out.
survived the
You know,
purge.
I was like, oh wait, you know, I found 3 of them, and I was like, oh, let me see how much, you know, the other ones are, and they're like $80 a piece. And I was like, all right. It's like, but yeah,
The
one of
collector's
the
market's interesting. Yeah.
yes, the collector's market is very interesting, and you know, things become collectible for, you know, scarcity reasons. They become collectible because of you know, controversy,
Well, and there's been,
misprintings. You know,
I remember when I can't remember which comic book it was, but there was Burnside. I can't remember I can't remember any of it now. But there was I ran a comic book store back in the '90s and this and late '80s, and when this John Burns Batman came out, it exploded, absolutely exploded in cost. But if you buy it today, it's like $3 or $5 because so many were printed and put in Mylar comic bags and saved that, you know, there's no scarcity. The reason there's a scarcity of comics from the 70s is because people's dads rolled them up and used them as fly swatters. Yeah. So
yeah.
They didn't survive the apocalypse of our life.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. Actually, this here comment brings up so Starship Warden. So I just saw on your website that are you running out of copies of it, or are you going to end that print like that?
So yeah, the Starship Warden, we've only got just bare over 100 copies, I think, something like that. So, and we are not as of now going to do a second printing. I can't say much about that, but Jim and crew have some fantastic prospects in front of them. But everything has to kind of be in one house before they can proceed. Okay. So that's all going. So this will be the last of the Starship Warden, at least for the foreseeable future. So if you want to get it, I'd recommend you go ahead and get it.
Get it now. Get it right now.
Yeah, I do not anticipate it coming back into the dens anytime soon. And it's all great. I mean, everybody's, there's no Knives Out or any of that stuff. It's all good. But
yeah, so now you heard, long shot, you know, get it now.
Yeah, I would recommend
it. Get it now. So let's see, what else do we have here as far as
John Schlow, yes. Davis highlights everything in his books. I was running T1 last night. I'm running a game of Castles and Crusades, but I put my favorite module of all time is the Village of Omelet. And I run it probably once every 2 years. And I was running it, and I like Davis's version that he got back in the Woebegone days, because all the little characters mentioned in T1, he writes their personalities out next to it. Just scribble through the whole thing, but I don't have to think. I can just go, okay, this guy is this guy is like this. It's really great. But yeah, it's scribbled all the hell over back again.
All right. Let's see what else we have. The paper recycling during World War II. Yeah. Yeah, that was my my father never really had any kind of sentimentality to things. You know what I'm saying? It was like, you know, he was a Depression baby. He was, you know, World War II veteran. He, you know, Worked all his life. He was a roofer, electrician before World War II, and then after World War II, electronics had exploded, to the point that he was like, what happened to vacuum tubes? I'm not ready for this, So he ended up, changing careers afterwards because he couldn't keep up with the new technology, and so when it came time to, growing up and moving up out of the house or whatever, and just that he never really instilled in me, to bring a lot of stuff with you. It was always, slash and burn, leave it behind, move on, start fresh everywhere you go. And it's like, I've gone on vacations, with a duffel bag, small duffel bag, all right, I'm on vacation. I'll buy when I'm there. I'll leave it behind when I come back. It's like, and I mean, in the military, you had your one duffel bag, right? It was like, and
my dad was career military. We moved every year until I was 12, and then every 3 years after that. And frequently when we would move, the movers would take it. He threw it in the dumpster. We know what he did with it.
Yeah, vacuum tubes. Yeah, that's back in the day when you had the television where it used to take forever for the white dot to disappear. I used to sit there like a kid timing it and see how long will it take for it to go away now.
The first, I was telling my kids, the first TV I ever owned myself. This is going to be 1985. Well, I bought some used piece of crap, from some flea market. Man, to get that sucker going, you'd have to smack it, and it would slowly come alive.
Yeah, and they probably still work today.
Probably. Yeah. Well made, no doubt.
Yeah, well made, without a doubt. Okay, so let's see. All right, so let's try to think about what's coming up next. So what's the next big project?
So we're working on the app right now, and that should be on October, give or take. And then Foundry is our next big release. We're going to do VTT on Foundry. I think the alpha test is either today or Monday. I'm not 100% certain on that. It was today, but I think maybe it got bumped. But my focus right now is on the Codex of the Planes, which is I'm taking the inspiration of the Manual of Planes and making a book, and I'm working extraordinarily hard to make it very playable. So when you open up to whatever plane it is, you have a quick reference chart, so you know how everything works, time, magic, all of that stuff. You don't have to do a lot of reading. So if your characters are plane hopping, there it is. You don't have to read 5 pages to figure out what this plane specifically does. And then I'm bringing the planes into a mythology that's a little bit more grounded in the dead, so that each of the planes is where dead go. So there's a reason that the plane exists, even though it exists very, very differently. And then I'm putting encounter areas in there, time, weather, stuff like that. So that the idea is, the design philosophy behind this is to take the Manual of the Planes, which is one of my favorite books. But I found that when characters were plane hopping, the information was too sparse for me to use on the fly. It gave me just enough to get me in trouble, and better in my estimation to just make something up that I have some kind of control over. But I mean, like Tartarus, I think, was 20 different worlds. Well, I can't make 20 different worlds in 15 minutes. I just can't. That's too tall of an order. And the Planescapes books, fantastic books, but they gave too much content. I don't have time to read, 150 pages of content when they're going to be on this plane for the next 45 minutes and then on to the next one. So those two kind of design philosophies, I'm trying to meet in the middle, give everything that you need, background on the plane, but make it exceedingly, exceedingly playable. So there's the Codex of the Planes that's being worked on. And then we are about to, in the next 30 days, give or take, we are going to release, or we're going to put the Amazing Adventures, or role-playing game, which is the multi-genre version of Castles and Crusades. Castles and Crusades is the fantasy. Amazing Adventures is everything else. We're going to put that up on Indiegogo. It uses the exact same siege engine. All of that's the same. So you can take a fantasy character and write into, Amazing Adventures, or vice versa, with zero problem. And you won't have, there's no learning curve. It's really just, you're playing the same game in World War II, or, steampunk, or whatever, horror, whatever it is, whatever genre you want to dive into.
And the characters can cross-populate and
Yeah, however
that kind of
you want to
thing,
do it.
which,
That's one of the
you know,
philosophies behind all of our RPGs is that they all
mm,
have to be with the Siege engine. We do, of
yeah.
course, we do 5th edition adventures, but any RPGs that we're doing are Siege engine.
Yeah, you know who else does that actually very well? You know, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but Bloat Games has their Survive This engine. You know, and so Bloat Games came out with like a zombie apocalypse kind of game first, and then they made a kids on bikes.
Heard of that
You
one?
know, yeah, Dark Places and Demigorgons is it's kind of like the kids on bikes, and then they came out with Vigilante City, which is their heroes, and every single one of them you can easily take the same character
Nice.
and move them into the different genres, or vice versa, and a really really cool way. Now that's all within, like, you could have it within one world setting,
Right.
kind of, here what it sounds like you're doing is that you can do the same thing, essentially with with amazing with the amazing system, and you're going to use a planescape to allow for that to happen, or
So
that kind of, the manual
that
of planes is the
that
access for that.
that gets into some deep lore, both in
Yeah,
Air, Castles and Crusades, design
yeah,
philosophy, and what I'm working on the Codex of Planes. So
yeah.
the world of Erd, which is in
Mhm.
the Codex of Erd, is actually Venus a billion years ago or something.
Okay.
Right? I never really pinned the time down, but the Gonfod, which is the end of days, is the end of Venus, and that destroys that planet. And this is all kind of woven into the histories. When you read the Codex of Erd, you're going to see where Unklar, the horned god, takes the flat world of Erd and shapes it and creates basically the solar system. And all of this is kind of designed and explained. So if you're playing in the world of Erd, that's great, wonderful fantasy world. You're actually on Venus, though you don't know it. You're in the world of Erd doing all of these things. Now, fast forward a billion years into our time. If you're playing a spaceman who's going to Venus to explore, you can actually go to the ruins of these cities on this map behind me that are there in Venus, buried under the sands, melted away from the end of days, which is called the Gonfod. So we're tying all of this together into one kind of big epic scope that if you're playing Amazing Adventures, you literally can pull the lore and the content from the Codex of Erd into the modern world. So Decipero is a major sword in the world of Erd. It's this huge artifact. You could actually have Decipero in Amazing Adventures in Manhattan, and it could be tied to Venus, tied to this ancient world and this ancient civilization. And the Codex of Erd is sort of setting us up for that, so that you can plane and time travel and do all kinds of stuff. It's going to have all that mechanisms there, so that if you want to do that transference, say you're playing a World War II game, you go through this magical gate and you end up in the world of Erd of a billion years ago, and now you're fighting in the village of Hamlet. Whatever, however you want to do it. So we're tying it all together very loosely, because I'm a big proponent of leaving as much at the DM's thing so they can manipulate as much as they humanly can. Give them a huge, nice framework. But that is the philosophy going forward over the next 24 months of publications. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, so we have a question here. So for people who create their own RPG rule sets, do you think it's right side or left side of the brain? Kind of, is it creative or mathematical or?
So that is actually a very interesting question, and you can look at the trolls and see that you play out immediately. Davis and Mac, very creative, but they lend towards the mechanics of it. Right. Mac really does lend towards the mechanics of it. He likes to see how it all kind of breaks down and works. And he, like, when I did I wrote most of the classes for the Adventurer's Backpack, but because I'm not mechanically oriented along those lines and mathematically oriented, I wrote all of the backgrounds and what these characters are and how they operate, and then I created their skills. And I wrote their skills and I sent it to Mac. I said, "Hey, man, you need to go over this stuff and make sure." And I got his note somewhere, but the whole thing's red lines all over the place. This needs to this percentage, this is got to compare to the fighter on this. Your BTH is off here, whatever. So I think, honestly, it's RPG creation is probably a combination of both.
Yeah,
you can go really light on the rules. If I was to make an RPG, probably the only game I have made. Now, I have done mechanical stuff for Castles and Crusades, but back when I was playing AD&D, I created a game where I took all the chits from like 5 or 6 different war games and I made a war game. But it literally is one sheet that I used at the table when we played it, and I never went beyond that. You know what I mean? The imagination can plug in whatever whatever you need at that point. But Mac doesn't like that. Mac wants it at least a rudimentary mechanic built into it. So I think RPG creation is probably a nice mixture of both to get to land you something like CNC, which I think has a very nice blend of both, you know, sides of that coin.
Hello, John Scott. So we have a hi from Toronto, Canada.
Oh, hey, John, how's it going?
All right. So, and we have from another hello from Raven Wolfgar. Yeah, we're starting to hit the afternoon crowd. So, as folks start wandering in and everything, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to the you know, to the app and checking that out. So, and as you said, that'll be in, I guess, like alpha in October, you know, and we'll see. Or
I think so. Yeah. That's, I'm not sure how much. Yeah, that should be. I'm getting that mixed up with the Foundry. The Foundry's like the next day or so.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be, you know, instead of playing video games on my iPad, I'll probably be creating characters like crazy on the iPad. You know, just
well, it is one of the things where it's not a subscription base. You just pay, you buy it, you make as many characters as you want.
Oh, we got it. Here we go.
Is this sorry?
It took this long. It took almost 2 hours for the Russians to find us.
That's so funny. You have graduated.
Yes. Usually it's a lot faster than that, but wow, it took. Who came on that brought these Russian, the Russian porn sites with them? I think it came from Toronto.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and Toronto came in, and the Russian bots followed.
So Tim is saying the alpha of the character manager app in November. Foundry.
Okay.
Today, maybe. I don't know.
You'll be dialing up the phone to find out real quick. Hey, wasn't this today?
You know, it's funny, and I've tried. I don't want to sound like a Luddite or whatever that word is. I think they've changed that word, but I am immersed in the print side of this business. I mean, absolutely immersed in it. Ordering paper, you know, binding books, making sure quality is up. So the VTT stuff, which Chuck brings up frequently, I really have to kind of reorient my brain. It's right. Wait a minute, over here, and it's a lot of.
Yes, we're going to start losing viewers now for the following.
They pulled them away. Porn RPGs.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, you know. Hey, so like I said, I'm really looking forward to that. And I think unless you have anything else you want to add, you know, to set us off for, you know, the next weeks and, you know, months to come, and really looking forward to the stuff coming out of Troll Lord Games. You said you have a Indiegogo coming up soon.
Yeah, we're going to put Amazing Adventures up on Indiegogo probably within it'll go live in the next 20 days. I should have the sign up page hopefully by tomorrow, no later than Monday.
Cool.
And we'll start putting it all over Facebook, Twitter, you know, all over the place that people can come check it out. And my pleasure, John. I absolutely love Joe Goodman. He's a very, very close friend of mine. And he did a fantastic job bringing the Temple of Elemental Evil back and the Village of Hamlet, which is still my favorite, favorite of all modules.
Yeah, let's see. And we'll wrap up with a few more here. Yeah, so Goodman Games. I know I just recently backed something from Luke Gygax, actually, that I'll bring up, and he's making that compatible with Castles and Crusades, or that was one of the 3 game systems.
I believe so. We talked a little bit about that. I believe I need to get him someone who can convert that over to CNC.
Okay. Yeah, because I know that was either where he was like one of the 3 systems that he mentioned that it was that was really why I backed it, you know, at the time. Plus, I've been back and forth with Luke Gygax over the last couple of years, you know, both of us being Army veterans, you know, and that kind of thing. It's all within the same circles, you know, we tend to travel in. and he's a really cool guy.
Yeah, I love Luke.
And meeting up with him for when I backed that, and talking to him, in a private Zoom with the other people that backed at that level to create stuff for that new adventure campaign that he's putting out there. And I was happy to see that that is going to be compatible, at least with with Castles and Crusades. Although Castles and Crusades seems to be compatible with whatever you want to make it compatible with.
Yes, it's pretty easy to take whatever you got.
Yeah, but really looking forward to that as well. So and really thanks a lot for coming in. It was a pleasure meeting you, and it's amazing how much we have in common. We basically same age, same, although you started playing 2 years before I did. I don't think I was ready for that at 8 years old.
You joined the army before I did, so
yeah. So but that's it's just so much comes together when you're looking at the different people around within our hobby, and to see how much we actually have in common, and just following the same interests, the same backgrounds. I mean, we have the same college degrees, which is almost sad. It's like, so now we both know both know the feeling of it. I ended up having to use it for teaching. So and and it is the least respected teaching field in K through 12. Oh yeah. It's like they treat it as it's certainly replaceable.
That's very sad. That's
because they people just don't learn history like they used to. I mean, used to have a good sense of it. I fortunately have some students that I'm still in contact with that are approaching their 30s. And they'll be like, "Oh, I understand all of these, constitutional implications because you taught me that." And I was like, "Yeah, but they don't get the same kind now." I mean, just the educational system has changed so dramatically
it's focused in a different direction.
Yeah, it's focused in a different direction, and you can kind of see that parallel really in gaming, and that it does, over these last 40 years, you could see that ebb and flow, and you could see different directions and different movements, if you want to call it movements. And, I'll leave it off on this note. I almost came up with the quote too. It's like, rumors of my demise has come up. I forget who, I mean, Betty White could have said that for a while now. Finally her number came up, but it's like, I don't see the hobby disappearing. At any time. I just don't see it, and it's because of people such as yourself and your brother and the others working at Troll Lord Games, keeping that kind of that focus on just traditional, genuine role playing, and that's something is really important.
It's all those people like everyone here in the chat room that just they love it and they keep playing it, and I think it's natural. I really think it's natural, and I think that there's so many young people that will and become interested in this hobby, if they're just kind of shown it. And you don't have to do anything outlandish. You just have to play the game, and people will gravitate to it. It just it's a great game. It is a fantastic game.
All right. So when we get back into OSR topics, I CNC kicked off OSR. I will certainly, back that idea, and Castles and Crusades and Troll Lord Games is in my view the standard bearer of what traditional role-playing games is all about. And if you want to say that's AD&D 3rd edition is alive and well, and and just the legacy of the founders of the hobby is really being pushed along the way, and introduced to to newer players and everything. I was happy to see some people talking about, hey, I'm going to introduce 5e players, or not just 5e players, but modern players.
Modern players, yeah, that's a good word.
Castles and Crusades, and I'm happy to see that other genres, because it's not just the fantasy genre. And that's the other thing I always try to push. OSR is not just D&D connected or fantasy. I mean, Call of Cthulhu was still an OSR, depending
Gamma
on which,
World.
Gamma World, Memory Alpha, not Memory Alpha,
Metamorphosis Alpha.
Metamorphosis Alpha, whether it's Star Frontiers, Gangbusters, Boot Hill, all of those, or you can go back. Even Rollmaster is still, because those are old, Tunnels and Trolls. All of these systems are freaking 40 plus years old, and how do you not include them in old school role playing? They're all part of it.
You're right.
And Palladium books, and they're all part of it, and to just introduce new players, modern players, to those older systems. And a lot of times they get it. They're like, wow, this is so much different than what I'm doing. I mean, there's a bit of a, system shock in their mind when they're like, wow, my magic crystal only has 2 hit points. It's like the wind could kill me. It's like,
it's one of the reasons in the 8th printing, we began this a little bit, not as aggressively as I wish, but in the 8th printing, we were very aggressive about modernizing the look of Castles and Crusades, so that young gamers coming over could feel at home, even as much as older gamers felt at home with the rule set. Because young gamers, they don't have that to worry about. They only know the one. So let me try this one out. But they need to feel comfortable with it. And that's why we really overhauled the look. It took a lot of work on Peter Bradley's part, because he'd try all kinds of stuff. And I said, no, let's do this. Try something different. And it turned out, I think, extremely well, because we've had a very nice response to it.
Yes, Indiana Jones, the best chase mechanic of role-playing games I've ever played. Yeah, it's the best car chase mechanics. Yes, I've heard that often. So I think, let's see, a domestic house cat can kill an AT&T. If your cat is nasty enough, it can kill a lot of things, not just a wizard.
Let me see if I can find it somewhere in this. I just happened to clean out some stuff the other day, and I pulled this old school stuff out. So one of the books that here it is. There it is. One of the books that I love the most is this little puppy here, Arduin Gamore's Skull Mountain. So
okay.
Skull Mountain has 2 things in it that I absolutely loved. One was a critical hit chart, which is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But the other was kill kittens. So these little kittens that would just mutilate your character. And that comment there by John reminded me of the kill kittens from Arduin Gamore.
Yes.
I can't get my box shut. There you go. Right. I'm always worried about damaging those more. We didn't care then. I care now.
It's like I've actually opened up packages with latex gloves on, the surgical gloves, because it's like, I don't want to mess these things up, especially the books with color plates in them and everything like that. Those I handle, and then I seal it back up and throw them on the shelf. It'll stay there forever. So anyway, Stephen, thanks a lot for joining. It's been really a pleasure, and I'm sure all the viewers really enjoyed it. Some great questions out there, everybody. So, thank you for stopping in. I don't know how long this usually takes to actually post up and everything, but I will certainly address any comments afterwards. And, I'll send the link out for when it does post on, on YouTube and Twitter afterwards, once they kind of finalize that whole thing, because it takes a couple hours, I think, for it to fully upload. And that's another crazy thing. That's another crazy thing with technology. Sometimes I've had videos take like 13 hours to completely upload, and I've had others that take, just a few minutes. So it's always
It's
kind
a
of,
mystery.
it's like flip a coin.
Yeah, right.
Today
Well,
or tomorrow it'll be done.
Thanks for having me on. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yes. All right. So thank you, everyone. And, take a look at some of the things that Troll Lord Games is putting out there, especially over the next, 20 some odd days. You'll see some new stuff coming out there. And I'm pretty sure that the Kickstarter or the thing is over for the app. But be on the lookout for the app when it does come out public, and jump on that as well. And looking forward to the new planes, manual of the planes cover, and that thing as well. So that's going to be really exciting as well. So, all right, I'm going to close it out here. Everyone, thanks, and
thanks,
have
everyone.
a great upcoming weekend. And if you're, like me, going on vacation soon, then
you got it.
Enjoy. All right, have a good one, everyone.
Take it easy.